So now we're on to durable manufacturing, electrical equipment, appliance, and component. And I'll go ahead and share this. This is what I'd like to call an ugly chart because it's making a hard right turn. And so I was wondering what in the world is causing the hard right turn. And what I saw was that there's a big drop in the producer price index for materials and components for manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a similar increase in wholesaler inventories. All are kind of happening at around the same time, all over the past 6 months. Those things kind of working together are trying to push this model the other way. In reality, I would kind of bet we would see more if it does take this drop like it's doing. It's probably going to do a little bit more of an arc here than what we're showing. But the other thing I want to point out is look at how wide variance is on this model. It's really pretty wide. I mean, you've got 5, 6, 7, actually about 8% on either side of the cone of the main prediction by the time you get out to the far end. So it's consistent with what we were seeing before. It's just a little bit more dramatic. We might see some changes here over the next month when the new numbers come in to see how it does. And I'm also going to take a look to see if there's any outside contributions of some factors that may be just pulling it one way unjustifiable.
John, just real quick on this one, it's interesting because this particular model, just comparing it to last month, the dip is not as dramatic, but the surge in growth is far more dramatic.
Yeah.
And then you get the tail off kind of toward the end of 2022. It's interesting. It is a more dramatic, more aggressive curve than what we saw at least last month. So
now I laughed and I said it's a hard right turn, but the hard right turn isn't unprecedented.
Mm-mm.
You know, these are the actuals before that, and this sector was all over the map. I mean, here's a hard right turn that was bigger than what I'm predicting. Bigger, a hard left turn that's bigger in scope than what we were predicting. So yeah, it's a hard right turn, but it's
and
not
again, this is one of those sectors that's so dependent on some of the more volatile markets we've been dealing with. Like appliances traditionally are driven by housing, and the housing market has been on fire. And more to the point, the reason that a lot of these houses have become more and more expensive, you know, we realize that housing prices have gone up, but we don't often think why. You know, it's not that they're bigger homes, though that's part of the deal. And it's not that the lots are more expensive, it's what's in the home. And the expensive appliances for the kitchen and the bathroom and the entertainment center and all those different things have created a lot of demand, which has been difficult to keep up with, not only because of component shortages, but we work with manufacturers, for example, that are in the heat treating and chemical coating business. They can't get the materials that they need to do that heat treating and chemical coating. And all of these appliances have to be either heat treated or chemically coated, or they can't be sold, they can't perform. Electrical equipment, same thing. I mean, it is such, we work for an electrical distributor association, and the sectors that they're involved in, I mean, it's everything from aerospace and automotive to sewage treatment and everything in between. I mean, we're trying to predict all kinds of economic drivers, all of which affect this sector.
Yeah, this is also one where some of the things that are happening in China with raw materials is affecting this industry, because China is trying to get, if you will, sort of more environmentally friendly, right? I say that with a little bit of a chuckle, but they are being concerned because the European Union imposed a cross-border carbon tax, and China has been labeled as one of those countries where anything coming out of China is going to get imposed. They're going to have a much higher tax imposed on it. So anyway, the Chinese government is trying to cut back on some of those emissions. And so aluminum smelters, some steel production. You're seeing a combination of them flooding the market with overstocks, but at the same time, pulling back production. And what I just saw yesterday was, about 75% of the capacity that smelters have available to them is only about 75% of normal. And so they're seeing a cutback in production. So aluminum prices have surged, becoming a little more difficult to get. And as Chris just said, I mean, that's a big component of it, especially the appliance side. But think about just electrical equipment and the copper that goes into wiring. And some of the components required there. I mean, copper prices are still extremely high. You've still got mines around the world that are still being hit with strikes, a little bit of COVID issues, especially down in South America. And so, just all of those little component parts that we don't think about are really creating a lot of volatility here. I'll just throw in one more thing. It's a complete anecdote, but my wife and I have been looking at replacing a washer and dryer. And we were looking at one of the major retailers, one of the national leaders in appliance, sales, if you will. And they were basically telling us that it's weird, but they'll suddenly get a wave of appliances in, but it may take them 3 months to get them. And then they'll be flush with appliances for about 30 days, and then they run out of stock again, and then it takes them another 3 months to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be some, when John mentioned like wholesale inventories and some of the things creating the volatility in the model, I think that's what we're feeling, are these surges in fulfillment followed by a lull and a sell-off, and then another surge, and then a lull and a sell-off.
So this is one of those models also, when we talk about the volatility, you look at this and you're thinking really volatile as, and I'm the one that brought it up about the hard right turn. But again, perspective and scale is going to really throw you off. Again, the models before were going down to about 80. Industrial production for manufacturing, its index bottom was at 80 at the dip. And so now we're looking at 90, not nearly as much. You're still starting off about the same place where IP NAND was. So about 10% less in terms of how much room is on this chart. And it really comes through when you take a look at the next chart. This is where the long range chart tells the story a little bit better. Is it really that volatile?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's some volatility there, but yeah, it was just about this volatile back in 2017.
And something else to notice this, I mean, I mentioned a minute ago that this was so connected to housing. Well, where was the housing boom in the last 10 years? Well, it was prior to 2008. So the demand for all that stuff was just intense in those years because we see high prices for homes. We don't see nearly the construction of homes that we did back in 2008. We've got housing shortage around most of the country right now. So if you want to get a real clear idea of how important the housing sector is to this sector, you look at this chart and it's like, oh yeah, when there's a housing boom, there was a tremendous demand for all this stuff. No housing boom, not much demand.
Yeah. And it is interesting, and maybe the model's picking up some of the risk that comes in sometime mid 2022 in the housing sector.
Mm-hmm.
So, Chris,
I wanted to mention about, and you guys can comment on this, but there's two plateaus here that on the long range that you really see. The thing that's happened since about 2011, you've got this plateau. This is where we've been centered around, and then previous. That's where we were centered around, 10, 15 points higher. So the entire dynamics of this market have changed somewhat. That the recession of 2008 fundamentally shifted this market,
right,
or this sector.
Yep, and I think that's one of those things. We haven't done a study on the housing sector per se. We're looking at all the different things that are being affected by the housing sector. But to Keith's point, there's a sense of being on a tightrope when it comes to housing, because the only thing that is keeping the housing market alive right now are low interest rates, low mortgage rates. Those mortgage rates start to come up even a little bit, all of those negatives begin to play a much bigger role. The fact that houses are more expensive, the fact that they're in short supply, the fact that you're dealing with people who don't have the wherewithal to get into the housing market. Right now, that's all being ameliorated by the fact that mortgage rates are low. Mortgage rates are not going to stay at this level forever. They're not likely to skyrocket in the way that they did in the 80s, but it's not going to take much to take the wind out of the sails, particularly because people are expecting them to go up and have done a lot of the refinancing and purchasing that they were going to do already. And so there's that kind of sword of Damocles thing where it's like, yeah, it's not a bubble, but boy, it looks like it's going to pop anyway.
Yes. So I've got a question for Chris, actually. Maybe you can answer this too. So I was thinking that if you look at the difference in those two curves, so, pre-Great Recession and then post-Great Recession, could some of that be offshoring? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe prior to the Great Recession, you had a little more US production on especially electrical equipment overall and appliances. And then since the Great Recession, maybe a little more offshoring. And I only ask that because we're starting to hear trends where there may be more new onshoring and reshoring,
Right.
a lot of manufacturing and production. And this is only measuring US output, US production.
Exactly. Yeah, you probably would see a bigger impact if you took these numbers back even further as far as the offshore shove. But we've certainly seen a lot of offshoring. As Keith mentioned, it's beginning to reverse. There are three things that will convince a company to come back to the United States if they had moved overseas. Number one is if they can be competitive with a low cost environment by using technology. And a lot of companies are doing that with robotics and the like. Number two is concern about the supply chain and not wanting to be as victimized as they have been by the interruptions we've had in the last year. And then the third thing that drives them, kind of related to the supply chain, is the demands of the consumer. The consumer now expects instant response. And so we have all of this development of, same day service, and you can get your underwear developed, and, all that stuff, all of which gets completely thrown off if the supply chain breaks down. So the consumer is saying, well, yeah, this is great that you can fulfill my order instantaneously if you have the product. But since you don't have the product, I'm now waiting for someone in China to make it, and then it'll finally get here. And once it gets here, you can deliver it right away. Great. But if you were making it here and delivering it from here, then you'd have more control over your delivery and you could tell me for sure when I'm going to get it. And we're training the consumer to want instant gratification. And they're less and less patient with someone saying, yes, we can instantly gratify you if China's cooperating. And we're like, well, that's not instant. So,
Well, it's going to have a complete impact on, when you think about the value stream for any manufacturer, how they handle inventories.
right.
It was always just-in-time manufacturing for all the different things in their supply chain, because maintaining inventory is an expense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's basically an expensive insurance policy. Well, people are demanding that, and you're going to see inventories, I think, rise of materials on hand within
Exactly.
manufacturing companies.
Yep, the just-in-time system is giving way to the eventually system, and it changes the way people structure.
I'll tell you, so there's been some surveys conducted in July of supply chain managers and sourcing managers, and we are seeing for the first time 67% of those that source products in China are basically saying that they are likely, somewhat likely, or extremely likely to do reshoring or nearshoring within the next 3 years.
Yep.
They're expected to spend over $1 trillion in cost just to try and change their manufacturing and sourcing processes. And so, and none of that has started to kick in yet. We are not expected to see that until like early 2022, because a lot of companies, honestly, kind of have to get beyond COVID before they can consider Mexico. It's been difficult for the companies we've talked to, difficult for executives even to just travel down there,
right,
to take a look at site selection and to understand what the labor environment looks like. And how quick it'll recover. And that, forget geopolitics, that all aside, just COVID alone has held that up. And so,
Yep.
so we do have a lot of those trends kicking in. And so I think that will fundamentally start to change this curve for the long term, I think, over time.
So are year over year, I mean, they all kind of, it's a little bit about what you'd expect with a model that has been running about in the same level for the last several years. When you look at year over year, they're all going to be on top of one another, and you can see that 2021 is not unique in the size of swings that we're talking about that we've experienced in 2021, nor is it unique in the one that we're predicting.
Yeah, not much to add beyond that.
All right. Well, then let's get ready to move on to another sector.
Okay.